If you're diving into Black Ops 6, you need to know these settings from day one. Now, unfortunately, Black Ops 6 has a lot of technicalities in it, and that means that there are some settings generally, especially in relation to movement, aiming, and even your HUD and minimap, that are radically different from previous Call of Duties. And if you don't change some of these settings, you probably will be at a disadvantage on day one. And some of this information is also just good to know. Not only can you make the colors in the game look better, you can change how your HUD works and hide things that you don't want to see, and you can also make it so that your movement in-game is as smooth and as fluid as humanly possible. And this video is going to show you everything you need to do to get everything right in that department. Now, if you find this video helpful, please drop a like and consider subscribing. We're on the road to 200k, and share this with your friends as well because it will give them key information as you dive into Black Ops 6. This video is also handily split into segments for you to cover the things you want to see. So drop a like, and without further ado, let's dive straight in. The first setting you're going to want to change is related to color customization. Now, you can find this very easily by going to the Readability tab, which is available in Interface, and then hitting Color Customization. Now, what you can do here is create an entirely custom color palette that will allow you to have more vibrant colors and identify opponents more in any given setting. You could change the setting for what you look like, what your teammate looks like, what your party looks like, what the enemy looks like, and pretty much everything in between. You can even set individual squad member colors for things like Warzone in the future. Now, the reason this feature is super helpful is because normally these come in default packages of muted colors somewhere in the middle of this wheel. But by changing it to a custom color, you could set the brightness to maximum and apply that custom color to make it more visually apparent when an enemy is on a map. I personally use bright pink for enemies because I think it's the brightest color that stands out from most visual maps in the game that allows me to see opponents more easily. You then want to select filter 2, hit apply to both, and set both of these to 100. And you can tell that it works because when you change the color bar on interface intensity, it will go from really bright orange to really dim orange if it isn't at 100%. This first setting alone is going to make seeing opponents much easier for you. The next big thing is choosing your HUD interface, and there are a number of different HUD interfaces available, and loading into a private game is a really good way of experiencing what these look like in real time. Now, these HUD interfaces are really handy for selecting something a bit more bespoke, but at the moment I'm leaning towards Target Tracker. Now, regardless of what you decide to pick, the important thing that you should note is that a square minimap is better than a circular minimap. You definitely don't want radar on because it gives you this radar backing instead of visual information about the map layout. You can change the scale of everything, including the map itself, as well as different icon scales in the map, which is really handy. So objectives can be minimized, which is something I highly recommend. And you can change what information is available on that minimap. I don't have information for objectives on. I don't want to know where the objectives are. I only want to see if there are players on my minimap and nothing else. The next thing is different layers of information. Weapon information controls whether or not you see your ammunition counter. Me personally, I don't really care for that much, so I'm going to keep it pretty much off. Equipment information is the same thing, again in a multiplayer environment, not something I'm too fussed about, so I'm going to keep that off for minimalism. Elimination ID is whether or not you see whether the player you've killed has a name and what their name is. That's something I'd keep on for general information purposes. Medals and notifications, unless you're specifically grinding camos, I would turn off because they are a visual distraction on the middle of the screen. The score feed tells you whether or not the score is being tracked in real time, and the elimination feed is, of course, the elimination feed. So far, these are the settings I've changed. I've scaled up the HUD, and I've put it on specifically this layout called Target Tracker, and I think this is a really nice layout because what this does, and you can turn the compass on or off. You can have the choice between having a minimap compass, a horizontal one, or just straight off having it off. For me personally, I've tied it to the minimap because you do see the direction of red dots on your compass. I think this is nice for multiplayer. This is a really clean view that tells me my score streaks. When you spawn in, you get new grenades, tacticals, and lethals, and your equipment will slowly recharge anyway. But this gives me everything I need, and it's reducing the amount of travel time for me in terms of looking at my ADS to looking at my minimap to see if somebody else has spawned in. And this setting in particular basically allows me to have a minimap that I can quickly put a side eye to without cluttering the rest of my HUD, and I've turned off pretty much anything I don't feel I need, and allows me to get straight into the action. I think this is a really good option, but again, this is something that you are going to have to entirely customize yourself, and you can change this however you like. If you like the settings that I have used, I've shown you exactly what I've used, and generally HUD presets are pretty big on this. You can also change the bounds of the HUDs as well, for example, which is something that is an option available to everybody if you want to change exactly how far in and how far out the HUD appears. So as a combination of changing the HUD bounds and the layout itself, you can actually move the minimap further central to the screen or move other elements further away from the screen based on what suits you. These settings are entirely customizable, and I highly recommend finding something that fits what you like. Regardless of what platform you are on, you are going to want to change a couple of these settings in terms of motion blur and field of view. Field of view, I have 105, and I do this because I sit at a 27-inch monitor. Generally speaking, your field of view should scale based on the distance that you're sat from your screen and the size of your screen. If I was sitting at a TV, for example, and I was further away from it, I would have a lower FOV, whereas if I'm using a gaming monitor, or a monitor specifically, a higher FOV works. ADS field of view, you want this to be set to affected, and this means that your ADS is affected by the field of view value, whereas independent introduces more of that visual kick and recoil. Having this set to affected means that if you have a higher FOV, you're going to notice less visual shake on your guns. For weapon field of view, you actually want this to be set to wide so that the gun takes up less of your screen. And generally, you also want this to be the same for vehicle field of view. World and weapon motion blur you want set to off. You also want third-person and first-person camera movement set as low as humanly possible to reduce visual shake. Another option this year you have is with crosshairs, and this also applies under the gameplay HUD setting that I mentioned earlier. You can now have a static crosshair as opposed to one that visually moves, and I much prefer this. You can also increase the size of your center dot, which is really good, and you can even change your crosshair color this year if you are so inclined. If you're somebody who wants something that looks visually quite different, or you're looking to create more contrast between your crosshair and the visuals of your opponents, these are great options for you, and these are something I would recommend messing around with. For those of you looking for the best controller settings, this is what I'm using. Now, sensitivity is definitely something that I would consider to be a little bit more bespoke. Lower sensitivities work for some people. I go 12-12, but these all work in combinations of other settings. Tactical flipped is the best layout because it allows you to crouch and prone without having to take your fingers off the aiming sticks, and I'd highly recommend using it. I flip my L1 and L2, you don't have to. If you prefer firing of L2 and R2, that's definitely the way to go. But there are some settings here that you should turn off. Controller vibration, I have off. Trigger effects and haptics, I have off. But dead zones, you want to try and get as low as possible. And you can actually test your dead zones and see just how low you can go. I put mine to 6 because I think that's a pretty comfortable value, but effectively, if you have stick drift anywhere on your controller, it will be identifiable when you're testing your dead zone. So if you see this L or this R starting to fidget around left or right, that will explain what's going wrong. So if I test my stick drift here, you can see that pretty much nothing is moving out of the ordinary, so 6 works for me. But generally speaking, you want to try and get that as low as possible for the best amount of responsiveness. Moving into aiming, sensitivity multipliers are not something I recommend changing, but you do want to go into the advanced aiming settings and change your aim response curve to dynamic. Dynamic is the experience that pretty much every professional in Call of Duty and in Warzone uses, because it means that when you move your stick all the way to the edge, you flick around really fast, but when your stick's in the middle of the stick, it moves really slow. This means you can snap left and right to targets really quickly, but still make those small linear adjustments for aim. Almost every professional uses a dynamic response curve, and I'd highly recommend having it. Instant ADS sensitivity timing is also something you want selected here. Moving on to movement, there is some big stuff here. You want tactical sprint assist to be enabled entirely, and this will make Omni movement super easy for you to use, and you specifically want to have sprint assist onwards for sideways and backward, and you want delay set to 0. Mantle assist you want turned off. I would not enable this at all in any way, shape or form. Crouch assist you want off, and corner slicing I turn off. This basically simulates the side of your gun creeping around a corner. I personally find the animation distracting when I'm trying to fix on a target, so having that off is definitely something I'd recommend. Automatic airborne mantle I would turn to partial. This only prevents it in a falling scenario. And all of these other settings are pretty much the same. Mantling cancelling reload is a personal preference thing, and that's also something you should change depending on your preferences. It basically means that when you jump over something or mantle an item, it's basically cancelling your reload if it's on. If it's off, you physically won't mantle that item until the reload is complete. In terms of movement advanced settings, I have toggle for sprint tactical sprint behavior, I have grounded mantle on, and sprint activation is set to single tap sprint as opposed to double tap. This is really helpful settings that will basically make your entire movement more fluid across the board, and you can copy these settings like for like. And then finally, in combat, some of these are a little bit personal preference. For example, armor plates applying all is pretty good, and that is something that I would recommend. Hold for aim down sight behavior, but for some of you who are a bit more El Clasico, you might like toggle. And generally, this is pretty much everything that I have enabled at this moment in time. Hopefully you found this settings video useful, and if you did, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. Everything is very customizable in Black Ops 6, but a few of these simple changes really do make a difference in the grand scheme of things. This channel for the next couple of weeks, hell, for the next couple of months, is going to be releasing everything you need to know for Warzone and for Black Ops 6, so make sure you keep an eye out for those, and I'll see you in the next one.